Hey, so welcome back, 12 of you. First, I'd like to apologize. I didn't mention anything on Friday. We had a PD day here in Chatham, Kent. And I was forgetting that not everybody we're in Ontario probably had the same PD day, so that's why I didn't respond or put anything up on Friday. It was a PD day, and yeah, I apologize. I completely had a brain fart there and didn't realize that everybody probably didn't have a PD day like we did. Okay, so we're going to do today. Just one other note. One of our students mentioned that the videos that we're watching, some of them you can't expand them to the full screen, which especially when I'm doing my lectures, like I'm going to be doing one today, it can be a little bit frustrating. So what you can do is you can go into YouTube and just type in my name, Mr. Bunning, and I'll have all my videos there, and you can get full screen from there if you like. Okay. So what we're going to do today, we're going to go through a little bit more on photosynthesis. Now, photosynthesis is the second process that we're doing in metabolism. The first one was cellular respiration, which we did aerobically and anaerobically, and hopefully everybody did okay on the quiz. Now we're going to go through photosynthesis. So I'm going to kind of do this little introductory activity, and then I'm going to give you some homework that I'd like you to do, which helps develop your understanding of photosynthesis, in particular, the light-dependent reaction. Okay, so I'm just going to bring up this screen here. Actually, before I do that, I want to show you guys something pretty neat. Okay, so when we look at this ruler right here, or this meter stick, made out of wood. Okay, now what this actually is carbohydrates. Okay, wood is simply a whole bunch of carbohydrates. Remembering that carbohydrates is used for structural reasons sometimes. Now, what's unbelievable about what plants can do is they can take water, pure water, and then the gas that's around your head right now, CO2. So they're taking water and the gas around my head, and they're turning it into this. They're turning it into carbohydrates, and they can turn those carbohydrates into wood. Okay, so when you look at a tree, you should be really quite amazed the fact that that tree, all the physical stuff that you're seeing, all that matter that you're seeing, is simply from water and CO2 gas they've put together and created something miraculous. Okay. All right, so let's go into photosynthesis, and we're going to start with our introduction here. Okay, so here's our photosynthesis. Here's the three things that have to come in. Carbon dioxide, we get that from the air. The water, we get from the soil. Okay, we don't get the water from the air, we get it from the soil. And then sunlight, clearly from the sun. And then we're going to release two things. Oxygen, that's going to be released right from the leaf. And then glucose is usually going to be shipped somewhere to be stored, usually in a fruit or a vegetable, or stored somewhere else into nuts. Okay. So first thing I wanted to mention is that photosynthesis uses majority of the energy coming down to Earth. Only a small percentage of it is being used. Only about 1 to 2% of the sunlight that's hitting the Earth is actually being used for photosynthesis. And the other big thing I wanted to mention on this slide is not just plants that do photosynthesis. There's also this thing called cyanobacteria, okay, which is bacteria that can photosynthesize. There's a picture of it there. And then algae. And if you remember from grade 11, algae is not really considered a plant. It's considered a protist, which is a plant-like a protist, and it can also photosynthesize. Okay, so here's our general equation. We've got CO2, water, and energy. We're going to combine these all together to create something more complex. Now, if you remember our second law of thermodynamics, it says that when you take something simple and you want to create order or something complex, you're going to need energy. And that's why taking CO2 and water, we need to put in energy in order to make it organized and into a structure like glucose. And then right inside this glucose molecule, a whole bunch of energy is stored. All that sun's energy is stored inside this glucose molecule. And when we burn it, we're going to release all that energy. Okay, now the importance of photosynthesis. So all food webs, okay, all food webs start with plants. Okay, the plants are the only ones that can create food. So that being said, plants really control all of the living things in the world. Because if plants aren't there, we're not going to be there. The only spot that animals and insects and amphibians and all the different types of life forms can live is areas that there's plants first. Okay, when we came to land, we had to have the plants colonize land first, and then we could go there. Okay, besides the fact that they're creating oxygen, they're also creating food. So very, very important photosynthesis. Okay, now, when we go through photosynthesis, we're going to simplify it. Okay, it's really over 100 chemical reactions. We obviously can't go through all of them. We're going to break photosynthesis in two parts, and it conveniently is broken into two parts. We have the photo part, which is part one, and then we have the synthesis part, which is part two. And they're very different systems here. Okay, today we're only going to go through the first part, the light-dependent reactions. Okay? And this is the whole goal of the first part is really just to trap energy. The second part is when we're actually going to use the energy to create glucose. Okay, so here's part one, and this is kind of an overview of the figure. It looks kind of confusing, but hopefully by the end of today, you're going to be able to figure this out as to what's happening here. I'm just going to give you a quick overview. Basically, sunlight's going to come down. It's going to hit this little area down here that's got some chloroplast, kicks off an electron. The electron travels down here. It uses the energy from the electron to pump a whole bunch of H pluses to create an electrical chemical gradient, very similar to what we did before in secondary active transport. Goes down to here. Another beam of sunlight comes, kicks off the electron. It comes down, and then we use that energy and we store it as very similar to NADH, but NADPH. Okay? And then we're going to send this down to the light independent cycle. Okay? And there's part two, but we'll get to part two a little bit later. Okay, now the first thing we want to go over is just basically where this is happening. So here's an entire cross section of a leaf. So this is the top of the leaf, this is the bottom. This is very, very thin, but we've made it big so it looks big. And what I want you to really focus on is this, the palisade mesophile. This is where all of photosynthesis is going to occur. It's just slightly under the first layer, the epidermis. Okay, and we got our waxy layer. And this is the cells that contain all of the chloroplasts that we're going to use to create photosynthesis. Okay? Other spots, I mean, you can go through this list, but I'm really going to focus you on big parts right here. The mesophile, the stoma. So the stoma is just a little opening that we can have CO2 and water come in. Okay? So not water come in, sorry, CO2 and oxygen exchanged here. And then the guard cells are just there to open and close them. Okay? The other big things you could kind of focus on is xylem. Xylem's used to carry water from the roots. So water came from down here, it sent it up to the roots. And phylum is moved to move glucose. So once we make glucose, we can send it to different parts of the plant. Okay? So I've kind of just brought this up a little bit bigger. So here's the top part of the leaf. There's the bottom part of the leaf. Here's the palisade mesophile, which we're really focusing on. Okay? And then here I've just kind of expanded one of these cells here. So I've just kind of blown up one of these cells. Okay? And then here we have the chloroplast. And my next picture is just going to focus in on that chloroplast. So here's a picture of the chloroplast. So I go back, I'm just looking at one of these here. And here's my chloroplast. And we want to focus on these things right here called thylakoids. Okay? So thylakoids are where all of the photosynthesis is going to happen. So we're inside the cell, we're inside the palisade mesophile, we're inside a palisade mesophile cell, and then here's the chloroplast, the entire thing. And inside the chloroplast, we have these stacks of things called thylakoids. The whole stack together is called granum. Okay? And this is where we're really going to concern ourselves with, okay, is in this thylakoid. Because if I go to the thylakoid, okay, so here's just another thing. Here's a palisade mesophile. Here's my chloroplast. Here's the thylakoids right here, all stacked up. We're going to be looking right on the membrane of the thylakoid. And this is where all of the light-dependent cycle is going to happen here, right on that membrane. So see where this area blue is that I've highlighted? This is what we see here, okay, is this gigantic mess here, okay, where we've got lots of things happening. This is the light-dependent cycle, and this is that membrane. You can see the phospholipids heads here, and there's a whole bunch of different carriers and channels. Okay, there's just another picture of what I was talking about, the leaf. Here's the cross-section of the leaf. Here's a single cell, and then here's the chloroplast that we're looking at. Okay, so there's just a good video that you can watch. Now, the second part that I'd like to go through, okay, it's not going to be very long. It's just a little bit shorter. And we're going to talk specifically about the light-dependent reaction, so the photo part of photosynthesis. Okay, so some background. So what white light is? White light is a mixture of all the colors of the light blended together. We can see that with a prism. Okay, so when white light comes in, it's really all of these colors all blended together. Now, what color is determined by its wavelength. So you look down here, red, here's a wavelength, here's a wavelength, and what these are really called are called photons. So different colors are different wavelengths or different photons. So a red photon is different than an orange photon, which is different than a yellow photon. And why they're different is they have different wavelengths or frequencies. Okay? So these wavelengths travel in packets called photons. So here's a whole bunch of different photons set down. And pigments in plants and cyanobacteria and algae can absorb certain wavelengths or photons of light and not others. So for instance, plants have a hard time absorbing this photon, green. Okay? So they can't absorb this wavelength. When it hits it, they just reflect it back, and that's why we see plants as green. But other photons, say the blues and the purples, they can actually absorb this and they can use that energy. So if you try to grow a plant under green light, it won't actually grow because it's going to reflect all of that light back. But growing it under blue light or red light really helps out. Okay? So that's what we have a little picture here. We got all the sunlight. Oops. We got all the sunlight shining down onto the green grass. Okay? The grass is absorbing all of these different photons here. So all of these different photons the grass is absorbing except for green. Okay? It's reflecting green back. And here's an example of what is being absorbed. So they're absorbing all the purples, the blues, and you can see there's different pigments that are absorbing these. And then when we get down to the green, they're not absorbing any. Okay? And then we get back to the red, they're absorbing those. Okay? So plants reflect back the green photons and they absorb all the other photons. If you've taken 12U chemistry and quantum mechanics, you probably know what I'm talking about when I'm talking about photons. Okay? So plants can't photosynthesize under green light because it's only one wavelength, but they can absorb other pieces of light, and there's some other photons of light there. Okay. Now we've got lots of different pigments that can absorb different photons. So chlorophyll A is really good at purple and blues, and is also pretty good at reds. Chlorophyll B is what we use for the blues, and then a little bit of the whatever you call that, oranges. And then we've got the carotenoids, which can do lighter blues and a variety of different wavelengths there. So we have different pigments. These are different pigments absorbing different photons. Okay, so photons are absorbed by photosystems. We've got two of them. We've got PS1 and PS2. A photosystem is simply, I'm going to show you a picture of one. There's a photosystem right there. Okay? And all it is simply a cluster of chlorophylls and proteins that can absorb photons. So here's we've got a whole bunch of different pigments. And this one's going to absorb a certain photon, so a certain color of light. This is a slightly different color of light, slightly different color of light. So this whole thing together is the photosystem, which is a whole bunch of different pigments that can all collect different photons. And whenever they collect different photons, they send all of their energy into the middle, which we call the reaction center. That reaction center is able to boot off an electron and make an electron become excited. Then we're going to use that excited electron a little bit later on. Okay? So you're now going to go to assignment 1. So what I'd like you to do is you are going to go to your assignment for photosynthesis. Okay? And basically what it's going to do is if I go back to that video, sorry, I'm going to take a look here, and I'll have this link for you. But basically, you're going to just type this link in. Okay, so my computer's going a little slow here. Okay, so my computer's just going really slow here, but basically you're going to put that link in. It's a video. I'd like you to go through, definitely go through that animation numerous times. Okay, it's a lot of information to go through, and I'm going to ask you some questions basically as you go through that animation. Okay, so the light dependent cycles are a big focus today. Hope you guys had a good weekend, and